The Harding Center has attractive, affordable apartments. The Harding Center is a senior housing community open to everyone 55 years old or better. There are several apartments available at this time, and all utilities are included in the rent. The Harding Center is the former Harding Hotel. It is an historical landmark and a place that should be seen by all. The Harding Center office hours are Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m., and their phone number is 740-375-4602. The telephone number again, 740-375-4602. The Harding Center in beautiful downtown Marion. Check it out. This is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Scott Spears Now. Last program, we discussed the Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman murder trial with 3 high school students here in Marion. We needed an opposing view. We got that from a man who was protesting on the opposite street corner that the 3 students were here in Marion on Center Street on July 19th. The gentleman, Tom Oyster. Let's get Tom Oyster's view of the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case right now on Scott Spears Now. This is Scott Spears, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Scott Spears Now, and certainly a subject as of late that has people in an uproar, to use the term lightly, is the Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman shooting that happened in Florida a little over a year ago. The verdict came down about a month ago, and here in Marion, Ohio, we certainly have seen quite a bit of fallout from that. On July 19th, there was a protest in downtown Marion by a group of students protesting in favor of Trayvon Martin. We had those students on this program about 2 weeks ago, and we want to give the opposing viewpoint to that by somebody who's actually seen that program, so we'll even get into that, and that is Tom Oyster, who was, if you watch that program, on the opposite corner of the street that day, protesting. What were you protesting, Tom?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say we were protesting anything, Scott. We were out there providing a different viewpoint. They were out protesting the verdict, which acquitted George Zimmerman, but we weren't necessarily protesting anything. We were just giving an opposing viewpoint.
Now, the thing that I was shocked about when I had the kids in, young adults, in, was that they said this had all been started by a Marion News website.
Yes.
But the Marion News website did not show up.
Oh, they didn't.
So that was a little peculiar to me.
Yeah, I kind of thought that was odd myself.
It was strange, but these kids, I applaud them, as I say then, I say now, for getting involved.
Sure.
Okay, so they got involved. We know how they got involved. We know why they did what they did.
Yes.
They felt the way they felt, and they saw the thing on Marion News. That's why they did it. How did you get involved in your thing?
Same way.
Okay.
We saw it on Marion News and decided that there needed to be an opposing viewpoint put out, just because we obviously saw the situation different than what these people did. So we decided that we were going to go down and we were going to stand on the opposite side of the road. Therefore, we weren't harassing anybody. We were not going to be getting in anybody's way, trying to avoid a confrontation, obviously. So we decided to stand on the other side of the road and give an opposing viewpoint. Now,
what is the opposing viewpoint? Because I'm kind of confused when it comes to the case in general, because I think the people we had on, the students, were saying that Trayvon Martin would not have been shot if he wasn't black. I think if people watch the show, that's what they would take away.
I think that is what they were trying to say once they were here, yeah.
Yeah. So what is the opposite of that? Opposing.
Well, that's not necessarily easy to say that there's an opposing side of that. First of all, I don't think race played an issue in this case whatsoever. Their initial protest was they were protesting the verdict of George Zimmerman being acquitted of murder and manslaughter. And those of us that were on the other side of the street support that decision. We feel that justice was already served in there and that he wasn't guilty based on the facts of the case, and he should have been acquitted.
So before we get into why you think he should have been acquitted, because I think that's the opposing from what you say. Okay, when they say it was about race and you say it was not, we've heard them say why it was. Why is it not?
I don't think that it didn't really come up. in the case. Even in court, it really didn't come up a whole lot. George Zimmerman has proven himself over and over again in his past that he is absolutely not a racist person. I'm not sure the reasoning for the situation, but he was raised in a family with two other black children, and I'm not sure whether, what the situation was in that, but that, was the case. He was raised with two blacks in the family. There's a couple other things here that I have written down here. What he does on the side, I don't know what he does for a living, but what he does on the side is he volunteers and works with at-risk black youth in that community. He volunteers his time to mentor at-risk black youth in the community. It seems kind of odd to me that an individual who would be racist enough to kill someone in cold blood, which is what he was accused of by some of these people, I find it odd that you would then, spend years of your life mentoring at-risk black teenagers if you're a racist person.
Well, I'm not sure about this, but I think when you get put in those programs, I think they tell you who to go with. I don't know if there's a lot of refusal in that.
That I don't know.
Irregardless, when we get to the shooting, you're right, and I think they even said that once it got to the shooting point of it, it was no longer about race.
I think, yeah.
But the shooting would not have happened. The fight would not have happened. The whole altercation would not have happened if he never would have suspected him. Because from what we know, the facts, without all the media spin and all the courtroom spin, is that he was unarmed, he was not breaking into anybody's house,
True.
He was not doing anything illegal.
We'll debate that in a second.
Okay, not doing anything illegal to my knowledge. He didn't have anything on him. He was dressed in a hoodie.
Sure.
And so why was he suspicious?
Well, that neighborhood, and bear with me for a minute here because it may sound odd for a little while, but that neighborhood is a gated community. Now, when George Zimmerman was out that evening, he was riding around in his truck because he was the neighborhood watch captain. He was in charge of being the civilian in that area, in that gated community, who made sure that there wasn't crime going on at the time, and then he would then report to the police if there was anything going on. They had a rash of burglaries in the area, in that neighborhood. Now, gated communities typically know who belongs in that community. And I don't say that as a racist thing. It doesn't say that this is a white community, that blacks don't belong or anything of that nature. But if you have a gated community that has a limited number of homes in it, in a very short amount of time, you learn who is supposed to be inside there and who's not supposed to be inside there. So if you see someone who is new that you don't recognize, you immediately are going to say, hey, this is somebody that I don't recognize, somebody that I don't know. And then Trayvon Martin was cutting in between the houses once he saw George Zimmerman coming behind him in the pickup truck to, check him out and see what was going on. He started cutting between the houses. Now, you can make the argument that Zimmerman caused him to do that, but had he not had anything suspicious happening with him, he would have probably stopped and talked to him. Now, as soon as you cut through somebody's yard and cut through your backyard, you've committed trespassing. So now he has a reason to follow him because he has committed a crime in his presence. He watched him commit a crime. That's trespassing in all 50 states.
But I think he had already profiled him before he started to follow him. And I think that here's the problem. I think most people are talking about was he guilty of murder or not. And I don't think any right-minded person thinks that he shot him, he had any intention of killing him. Nobody thinks that.
Absolutely not.
Right. And that's not the issue on the table. I think the issue on the table has been, and what nobody has answered fully is why did he ever decide to get out of his car? Now, I understand your gated community argument, but I think herein lies the problem, because he obviously was supposed to be in that gated community. His father,
Sure.
Okay, and there had to have been other people who did not belong there, who this guy did.
There probably always are.
Right. So why, again, this particular person, why? Because it would stand to reason that Trayvon Martin was not going to rob anybody because he was supposed to be in that neighborhood, and he wasn't armed, so he certainly wasn't going to do any damage to anybody with any weapon, whatever it may be. And Zimmerman is put in this position to watch the neighborhood, so if everybody is suspicious, then I think we got a problem. Because if
Okay.
everybody's suspicious, then we're all in trouble, just
I
for
agree with
walking in
that.
our own neighborhood. So what about this particular kid? Because that hoodie thing just doesn't get it for me.
No, I think that has been one of those hot button issues. They're portraying Trayvon Martin as this innocent 12-year-old hoodie-wearing kid with a little bit of candy in his pocket, and I think that's just the media trying to drum up feelings and emotions in people. Whatever he was wearing is completely immaterial to the case. You've said a couple of times now that, something about George Zimmerman getting out of his vehicle. Well, what it looks like, and what obviously the jury agreed, was that he got out of his vehicle so that he could get a proper description of this individual so that he could give it to the police dispatcher who he was talking to on the phone.
Do you think if this was a woman, do you think if this was a senior citizen, do you think if this was a 15-year-old child, and this same situation happened, do you believe he would have been found guilty?
No, I don't think so at all.
You don't think?
No, because the facts of the case, what they are, whether you agree whether he should have got out of his vehicle or not, he was not the aggressor in the situation. There was multiple testimony by two witnesses plus George Zimmerman himself that said that Trayvon Martin was the aggressor, that he threw the first punch and then, had him down on the ground and was pounding his head against the sidewalk. I don't think you would have an elderly person or a woman that would react that way in that situation.
There are women, though. I mean, in our society, and certainly it's true, we don't hit women. So if a woman's coming at you, certainly I think you can probably feel in danger. And I know some women who would probably, if they were angry enough or whatever, might come at you. So he certainly could feel threatened, and I think they were. I guess the point I'm making is I think if this is a story about a African-American person getting out of their car, and we all know George Zimmerman, Hispanic, but lighter colored skin.
Sure.
Okay. If it's an African-American person getting out of a car and eventually killing a Caucasian person, I think the story is a little different. Because I don't know that they would have, because I don't know what the suspicion was on him.
I would go back to saying that he had never seen him in the neighborhood before, and he was out in the middle of the night. So I would have every reason to stop and talk to him. If it was me, if I was the neighborhood watch captain, I probably would want to talk to him too. Why do you have an individual walking down the middle of the street at 3 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock, whatever time of the day it was, but it was in the middle of the night? Why are you walking down the middle of, the street right now? Why are you out? Why are you, here? I don't recognize you. You're not someone that I have recognized as living in this neighborhood, and this is gated. So you have to have a reason to be in here. I mean, you have to have the ability to get in here. You have to have the code. You have to have the key, whatever the situation is. You have to get in here some way, or you've broken in. So there's really two options. So he has every right, I think, to stop and talk to him.
I felt something that was very interesting, and since you've watched the program, I think it's important, that the only person who I've had on in this whole situation who was African-American was the girl we had over here, Miss Scott. Now, talking to her, and I did ask the question, I said, how would your life be different than mine? What would you experience that I would not, based on the color of your skin?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought her answer was pretty good, and I think people can go back and watch this. She's followed in stores, being with white people sometimes gets the white people in trouble, and I believe that does happen. I
don't argue that has happened.
I believe that has happened. So why is it in the society that there is a difference just based on the color of your skin? Because if it didn't happen in society in general, I don't think we could apply it to this case, but we know it happens.
It's probably true that you couldn't apply it to the case if it wasn't something that has happened before. But I can't necessarily speak for why I think that happens or why that it is, because I don't see people that way, so I can't comment on that.
Well, I think it's interesting, because I think if you, in the middle of the night, somebody's in your yard, I think, again, if it's a senior citizen, you probably go out pretty easily and you say, are you lost? What's going on? But if it's a 35-year-old male, you probably have apprehension.
Absolutely.
So I think it's, again, I think everybody does profile a little bit.
I think profile is a strong word there, I think, because profiling, I think insinuates that you have already attached some sort of a stigma to them. So if there's a ruckus in my front yard at 3 o'clock in the morning and I go outside to see what's going on and it's an elderly person, you're right. I'm probably going to make sure that they're okay. Let's get them some help. If it's a 35-year-old white male, I'm probably going to be a little apprehensive and figure out, why are you on my property? If it's a 17-year-old black male, I'm going to be a little apprehensive. I'm going to say, why are you on my property? We're going to get this sorted out, and you're probably going to leave, and probably do so in a pretty rapid manner. But I don't think it matters the color of the skin by any stretch of the imagination. But if you have any sort of a male who is, of age, anybody over, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, up until, you're really too old to be a threat to me anymore, I'm probably going to have some apprehension. The same thing with a woman, though. If I've got, a 20-something woman that's in my yard, I'm going to be acting the exact same way. I don't think that's necessarily profiling. I think that's just realizing that there are certain members of society, the young and the old and things of that nature, that they're really not a threat to you.
Well, I think it becomes a problem because, much like at airports, the senior citizen probably is not going to be the person of a certain religion, might be, but
Right,
technically
right.
the senior citizen could cause you harm in that
Sure.
situation. So to me, that is profiling because it could be a bad thing. It
I think
could
it
end
could
in a
be.
bad way, but just because
I
of
do.
the way we see a certain group,
Well,
we
you
say,
have to
well,
look too at demographics and crime statistics and stuff of that nature. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but I'm going to take a stab in the dark here that you probably have more crimes committed by, say, 17 to 40-year-old males than you do from 65 to 90-year-old males.
is there something to be said for the fact that somebody who is in a minority, African American or Latino or whatever it is it safe to say that solely based on that, just the fact that they are who they are, that certain aspects of society see them in a different way?
Absolutely.
So how do we know that Zimmerman wasn't part of that group? And I understand the tutoring and
there
that sort
is.
of thing.
And then there is another issue that I can bring up with George Zimmerman. This is back a couple of years ago. There was a homeless black man in Sanford, Florida, who was assaulted by a police officer's son. And everybody kind of brushed it underneath the rug. And George Zimmerman was the man who staged the protests, who made up the flyers, and caused a big stink down there until this man was charged. So, can you say that that was because, he was black? I don't know. But it certainly does go to show that he didn't care in that situation, that he was African American.
So to wrap up this whole race thing, because I wanted to talk about this because that's what the last
Right.
program
I'm
mainly
okay
was
with that.
about.
Sure.
If it wasn't race, before he started running through the yards because Zimmerman got out, when he initially made that call to 911,
Yeah.
what was it about him? What do you think, because you're not him, but what do you think he saw suspicious? Just an unrecognizable person? Were all unrecognizable people at that point just as in danger?
The way I understand it, and I may have my facts wrong, but the way I understand it was that the 911 call was made after he started running through the yards. Is that he had tried to make an initial stop with him, try to talk to him, let's see what's going on. When he initially tried to make that stop is when he took off running. That was my understanding. At that point, your suspicion flags have gone up even farther, and that's, in my understanding, when he made the phone call.
If that's not, I mean, just based, because it all comes back to this, I think. What was suspicious about him? If he's not running through yards, if it's not race, which I think the students would say different, but if it's not, then what was it? And it's not the hoodie.
No,
So what
I don't think it's the
what was
hoodie.
suspicious?
Again, you've got somebody walking through your neighborhood in the middle of the night that you don't recognize, and you know that there has been a rash of burglaries in the area overnight. I think any time that you have somebody that you don't recognize in the area, you have every right to stop and talk to them. This isn't walking down the street in Marion. This is a gated community that you either have to have a passcode to get into because you live there, or you've had to scale the fence and break in, essentially, into that neighborhood. So it's not like public streets where you're going to have anybody that can walk down those public streets. Those streets inside of a gated community, you're supposed to be there if you're on those streets. And I think that right there causes enough suspicion. If you're someone who lives in that neighborhood and you're the block watch captain, you know who lives in your gated community. And I think if you don't recognize someone that's walking down the street at 3 in the morning, I think that's reasonable enough suspicion to stop and talk to them.
What is the difference between a neighborhood watch and a police officer?
Well, the neighborhood watch is not a police officer.
Right, but in this particular case, what are the rights of a neighborhood watch person to do that a cop could not do, or won't do, or will do? What's the difference?
I don't know that there is anything that goes that direction as far as that the neighborhood watch, whether it's the guy who organizes it and they call him the captain, or whether it's just one of the members. I don't think there's anything that they can do that a police officer can't do. I think it's the other way around. Obviously, the civilian who is part of the neighborhood watch certainly doesn't have arrest powers, and you certainly don't have the right to detain anybody, but you have the right to talk to somebody, absolutely. Again, I don't think that the neighborhood watch would have any greater power than a police officer in any situation.
It was my understanding that neighborhood watches were exactly to do that, watch. Not
Yes.
necessarily, because I thought the point of these neighborhood watches was so if something was going on, that it wasn't just on that person who owns that house.
Right.
It could have been the neighbor
Sure.
can call the police, and we're going to
Right.
keep an eye out because we know you're not home. But it's turned into something much bigger than that, to where we have people who have they're captains,
Sure.
and they're going around armed, and
Well,
things are happening.
I think those two things don't necessarily go together. I don't think saying that the neighborhood watch captains being armed necessarily correlates with just being with the neighborhood watch. The way that neighborhood watches work up here, and again, I don't know how they necessarily work in Florida, but in Ohio and around here, and we've got them in Marion, you have someone in the neighborhood that coordinates what it is, and you get the people a little bit of training. They understand what to look for. They go through a little bit of training. Usually it's led by a police officer, at least the ones in Marion are. You can call down to the city police and say, hey, we're going to start one of these. There is an officer designated to come in and do a little bit of training with you so that you understand what to look for, and then when if you need to make a phone call into the police department at that point in time, what information you need to give them. What information doesn't matter to them. There's certain descriptions. Okay, we need to know this, and this, and we don't care about the rest of it. This gets us enough, so you're not on the phone for 5 minutes giving them information they don't need. The fact that he was armed, he had a concealed carry weapons permit. So I think those two things don't necessarily go together, because the block watch captain, or the block watch individuals, are not legally armed by the police department. They're not given a weapon by the police department. I think those are two very separate issues.
Do you think if this happened in Marion, Ohio, where we live, that the same outcome would have happened?
As far as him being acquitted?
Yes.
I don't see why not. I think the facts of the case don't change, based on the geography of the case.
Okay, so in Marion, Ohio, theoretically, because a lot of this has been laid back on the whole stand your ground thing, whether that applied or not,
Okay.
it's been laid back on that. We don't have that here.
No, we don't.
So in Marion, Ohio, again, somebody's walking down the street, same situation, African-American, under 18,
Okay.
walking down the street, and one of the neighborhood watch people in our neighborhood decides he's suspicious. They phone the police. They say, this is what's going on. The police say, don't get out of your car, or don't approach, or whatever was said there. Person decides to do that anyway. They have the concealed carry weapon. The person starts to beat them up, and then the person shoots them, kills them.
Okay.
You think it goes the same way? It goes to court.
I think it
the person's
does.
acquitted.
There was one other thing there that I would like to debunk that you said. George Zimmerman was never told to stay in his car. If you listen to the 911 tape, let me find it here, because I wanted to be accurate, so I looked it up for you. What they said was they asked for a description of the individual, and he said, I'm currently following them to try to find that out. I'm going to get out and get you a better description. And the dispatcher said, we don't need you to do that. He was never necessarily told to stay in his car. We don't need you to do that does not say, do not get out of your car.
But isn't that semantics, though?
Not necessarily, because part of people were saying he was told to stay in his car and he disobeyed a police order. The dispatcher is not a police officer. They have absolutely no authority over you as a civilian. They can't tell you what to do or what not to do. And in fact, had they said stay in your car or, yeah, okay, go ahead and follow him, either way, they're giving directions at that point in time. They are legally not allowed to do that. So by them saying we don't necessarily need you to do that, that doesn't tell him that he needs to stop doing. That just says we don't need you to do that. He was trying to get the best description that he possibly could so that if this guy got out of eyesight, that once the police got there, they knew who they were looking for.
Well, see, I think it's interesting because I think this brings up an even more interesting point, knowing that was the exact verbiage that came out of the dispatcher's mouth. I don't suspect that they are allowed to tell you what to do and what not to do, and I think that's kind of beyond the point for this reason. I think when people feel empowered enough to when you call, because obviously he made the call to the dispatcher for some purpose,
yes,
to report something, so he does that. And they say, we don't need your help any further. We don't need you to do that. We don't need you to do that. Why go and do it? See, this is where I think people feel, when you get that neighborhood watch thing, you feel just a little more empowered than maybe you should.
And maybe you do. I'm not part of a neighborhood watch, so I can't necessarily comment on that personally. But and I think maybe he did overstep his bounds a little bit, but I don't think he committed any crime. And I certainly don't think that he by getting out of his car and trying to get a better description, he certainly did not bring upon himself to be assaulted, by a guy who was larger than he was and was trained in mixed martial arts, who then had him on the ground and was, essentially beating the tar out of him. Just because he may have overstepped his bounds, but he didn't break the law in doing so.
Well, and I think that's another interesting aspect of the whole thing. We really don't know what he said to Martin to make him do that.
We don't.
So again, it's a weird thing because, you know what, if you walk up to somebody and call them a name, a certain name, or anything of that nature, people I know will get out of the car and they will come at you.
Sure.
And are they totally unjustified in doing that? Do we live in a society now where a fight can end in a death and that's okay?
Absolutely.
That is okay.
Yeah, I think, okay. It's never okay when someone is killed. And obviously, this situation is a tragedy any way you look at it. I mean, there is a 17-year-old individual who is dead, and there were probably bad decisions made on both sides. And I will bet every dollar I have that George Zimmerman will be the first one to tell you he should never have gotten out of his truck. I think he would be the first person to raise his hand and said, if I had stayed in my truck, this never would have happened. However, the situation being what it was, he was out of his truck, he was getting a description, and he was assaulted. And he was assaulted enough to the point where he felt his life was in danger. I mean, he had a guy who was larger than he was 4 inches taller than him, who was much younger than he was, and George Zimmerman is clinically obese. Okay, so the guy's not going to be able to fight back very well because he's out of shape. So he's got a guy who is 17 years old, who is trained in mixed martial arts, who has fought in mixed martial arts matches and has won, pummeling him, and he's unable to fight back any other way. I think he's completely justified in the shooting.
Aside from the mixed martial arts background, he would have known all that other stuff when he approached him. Why did he do that? Because if I am in a place and somebody calls me a name, and I see that this person is bigger, stronger, and younger and nastier than me, chances are I'm not going to pick that fight.
Probably not going to.
So why did he?
He was getting a better description.
I understand
and
that.
we don't know what happened. We don't know what sort of verbal altercation there was beforehand. We know that George Zimmerman was getting a description, and basically the next step that we know for fact was that he was on his back and he was getting his head smashed into the sidewalk. And that's when he decided to pull his gun and fire 2 shots.
Which is another interesting point. I want to get, because I do want to get to the exact protests that happened downtown.
Sure.
But the other interesting part of this is, and I can't figure this out, if you are getting beaten to death,
okay,
and by a guy who knows mixed martial arts, and he's tough, and he's bigger, and he's stronger, and he's obviously beating the tar out of you, and I don't deny that, how do you have the wherewithal to grab around and pull your gun out and cock it and fire it at the person without them stopping you? I don't understand if they were at this close of a range. I mean, he's on top of it.
Right.
How did he not see this coming, and how did Zimmerman have the ability to do that?
That I don't know. I would say, if my best guess is that he probably had the gun in his pocket, or that he had it on a holster down on his side. And if you have an individual sitting here on your chest that's focused right here and throwing punches and strikes on your head, you can do stuff behind their field of vision. That's my best guess, is why he wouldn't have seen it coming.
And one more thing, if he, because he knew he called the dispatcher and somebody was coming out. I mean,
we assume that Trayvon Martin knew that.
Yeah, well, not Martin, Zimmerman.
Oh, Zimmerman.
Zimmerman
yes.
knew that, and he is in this gated community with his friends and his. Where are the other neighborhood watch people? I don't know.
Well, usually I would imagine there's probably only one on in the middle of the night.
Right, but wouldn't you for backup on something like this, because
Would you?
I
mean,
it's middle of the night.
The police were there within a minute.
Oh, there we
go. They
go.
were there within a minute of the
There
shooting.
within a minute. So he knows. Now, Martin does not know that the police are coming.
Right.
Zimmerman surely does, because he made the call. So did he feel he was going to be killed in a minute? Because what I would do, if this is me, again, everything I know except the mixed martial arts, that's the only thing I don't know about this guy. Why in the world would I, knowing the police are coming, knowing I can see him, knowing he's right here, why would I ever put myself in the position to where he could grab a hold of me? And also, he was obviously had enough brains in his head to pull the gun out to shoot him.
Sure.
So he was not near death. He was not minutes from death, and he knew the police were coming. I mean, when you know the cavalry's coming, I think you're less afraid than you are.
When you have someone sitting on top of you and pummeling you into the ground, and they're banging your head on the sidewalk, you don't know how far the cavalry is away.
Right,
and to be honest, if you fear for your life, I don't know if you've ever had your head smacked against stuff before, but I've been in situations, and when I served in Iraq, we're getting blown up, shot at, things, and you're banging your head against the inside of the truck, and that you hit your head hard enough, you see stars pretty quick. I mean, I know it's funny in the cartoons when they see that, but you do. If you get a good enough strike to the head, you start seeing those flashes of light and stuff on there. And I think if you really think that your life is about to end, you're going to take action right now. You don't have time to stop and think, well, the police are 30 seconds away. They might be 3 minutes away. 3 minutes is a long time. They were there within a minute of the shooting, but hindsight being 20/20, they were there within a minute of the shooting. But he probably had no way of knowing when the cavalry was coming.
Right, but I think, again, I would place myself again before he ever got grabbed a hold of. Because at some point he either had to be an arm's reach or have irritated this person enough to where they ran after him.
Okay.
Okay. So at that point, knowing that the police are coming and knowing I can see him,
okay,
why push it? Why push it further?
Well, again, we don't know the exact details of that part of the story because we weren't there. But when I teach concealed carry classes, we teach people to keep an individual outside of what we call the 22-foot bubble. An individual can cover 22 feet before you can react to it. So he doesn't really have to be that close to him, especially knowing now what we know, that Trayvon Martin was in good shape. He was a fighter. He had been trained. He was probably quick on his feet. Obviously, if he's competing in mixed martial arts, he's probably he's quick on his feet. He's in shape. We know that George Zimmerman wasn't. So two equally fit people, one individual can cover 22 feet before the other person has a chance to react to that. So you put those other factors in there of one being clinically obese, the other one being in very good shape and being a trained fighter, that distance is going to have to increase at that point.
See, but I think, again, this is where people who are watching this and probably watch the trial feel that this is different than your typical assault case. Because I think there were a lot of things that, if different, and hindsight is 20/20, but a lot of things, if different, he could have been justified in this. I think had Trayvon Martin been breaking into somebody's home, this would have never been a case. I think if Zimmerman had just followed him, this would have never been a case. I think if he obviously had his gun there and knew he did.
Sure.
If he would have pulled it out and waved it, I don't think who we now know Trayvon Martin to be unarmed would have
Had
approached
he pulled it
him.
out and waved it at him while he was not committing a crime, Zimmerman would have been committing the crime of brandishing a firearm, and that's a felony.
Well, I think better though than dead.
Oh, absolutely.
So
better than
again,
dead. But
if he felt threatened,
he's not going to commit a crime on somebody. If you've got an individual, again, walking down the street, the guy's suspicious, maybe he's running through the yards at this point, maybe he's not, we don't know. You're not going to pull a gun on him and point at him. You're not a police officer.
right? But so every time you pull it out, it is to fire.
That's the way that we basically train people. Yeah, you need to be at that point. You don't pull it out and wave it around and threaten somebody with it. Absolutely not.
Well, not threaten. I'm not saying threaten. I'm saying if you feel threatened, why do you have to shoot?
No. That's not exactly what I'm saying. I'm not saying if you have somebody who is assaulting you that you immediately have to pull it out and shoot. But in this situation, absolutely, there's no other option. You're not going to pull it out and stick it in his face. He's going to take it away from you.
Right, but
At that point, he was too close to him.
Before he threw him on the ground, at some point he had to turn to him. At some point he had to turn.
We don't know what that distance was.
Don't know
at the time that happened. So
maybe
if they're standing there talking as close as you and I are now, and and Martin decides to throw a punch, there is no opportunity to pull your gun and say, all right, it's time to back up.
But I think again that gets into the peculiarity of why did he start attacking him? I mean,
that's true.
And again, it's a sad thing that somebody's dead and will not get to live their life. And somebody had to go on trial and now has to live in some kind of obscurity, although he doesn't seem very obscure because he has gone around.
He has been on the news again since then.
He's flipped around. It seems to me awful peculiar that we have to go through this just because we don't know what was said and why it was said. And I think that's a sad thing because just because there are no witnesses.
I think in one instance, though, you have to look at it as it really doesn't matter what was said. There's no state, in this country that I know of, at least, that allows assault based on someone using words against you. So
Right.
It doesn't matter if they were arguing. They can argue all day long, but if you throw a punch, now you've escalated the situation, and at that point you are not justified in doing that because, I don't know of anywhere where you are legally allowed to assault someone because they're verbally assaulting you.
And I think herein lies the problem because, not saying you would do this, but somebody who's concealed carry.
Okay.
Now, if you go to any number of, alcohol is legal. Okay, you go to a bar.
Okay.
Okay, you go to a bar and you have your weapon on you because you are legally able to do that.
Okay.
Okay, you go in and for some reason you don't like something somebody's doing. Now, whatever, yelling at their girlfriend,
Okay.
whatever, you don't like it. So you walk up, not to pick a fight, but you walk up to say, stop doing that. They turn around. Now, immediately, this happens over and over. I think you could go into any bar on any given Friday night and see this is going to immediately cause a yelling match.
Right.
And if you say the right thing, hey, you jerk, hey, you, some more four-letter words,
Sure.
that person's going to swing at you.
Absolutely.
And you expect them to.
Absolutely.
And when they do, then what do?
Well, first of all, you don't put yourself in that situation,
But people do.
and that's their problem.
But if we don't have a witness to what was said, then we theoretically could have this.
Right, but because you put yourself in a bad situation, because you may have been wrong in verbally accosting someone, that doesn't mean you've committed a crime.
Well, I think when people end up dead, though, that's problematic for people because
Of course it's problematic.
there was a time when you could defend somebody. You know what I thought about when I heard about this case? I didn't think black and white. I didn't
No.
think about that.
I don't think any logical person will look at the facts of the case and think that this has anything to do with race.
The only time I thought about it was when they started throwing that hoodie thing around because obviously I don't have a lot. I really don't. None of the reasons given have, personally to me, would have been reason for approaching him. I just wouldn't.
I disagree with you on that.
That's right.
Had
That's
I
fine.
been the neighborhood
And
watch
that's fine.
captain in that situation, I absolutely would have.
I might have
approached him.
called,
Sure.
but I would. I want to know what
Sure.
made him suspicious. But we've been there.
We've been there.
So the other point is that the problem is I know people. I know when they're dating in high school, and this is a high school boy. No matter how people want to
Right.
paint him, he was a high school boy.
He was 17 years old.
High school boy. boy, they get their girlfriend, their testosterone is at a high that
Sure.
time. High school kids get in fights all the time.
Absolutely.
And sometimes they get in fights with people who are over 18.
Sure.
And you say something to the girlfriend,
Mm-hmm.
and they think they're defending the honor, so they
Right.
swing at you. Now
Right.
you've got that on you, and you feel threatened because now they are bigger, badder, and meaner, and they're not
Right.
they're not there just to hit you once. They're there to do some damage to you.
Absolutely.
So, but didn't that person bring it on themselves? But in the end, you possibly, theoretically, and now proven, could end up with a dead person.
You could. Again, we're on the same side of the argument, yet we're arguing different sides of it. If I verbally assault you, I may be wrong, but I haven't committed a crime, okay? So if I verbally assault you and you then physically assault me to the point where I feel like I am going to lose my life, then you are justified in shooting someone.
But doesn't that empower the person, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, the person being bullied, doesn't that empower them? Because in the end, they are going to have the final word. I think it changes the game. Here's what I think.
It certainly changes the game. But you have to understand here, too, is that, again, and I've said this 3 or 4 times now, you may be wrong, but you haven't committed a crime. That doesn't necessarily say that you've put yourself in a good situation. Now, bringing it on them, bringing it on yourself, you deserve to have your, hind end whipped, something of that nature, fine. But you also have to look at it from the other side of this, is that if all I have done is insult you or insult your girlfriend or whatever the case may be, I've insulted you because I asked why you were walking down the street in the middle of the night wearing a hoodie. That's nothing more than assault, insulting some of your pride. That also doesn't justify completely pummeling someone. I don't think it justifies ever even physically assaulting anyone. I don't think you're justified in punching them at that point. However, it certainly doesn't justify getting someone down on the ground and banging their head into the concrete. At that point, the dynamic of the situation is completely changed at that point. So I think it's immaterial what was said. At that point, we're not dealing with what was said anymore. We're dealing with the facts of somebody's really getting pummeled and they could lose their life.
Well, yeah, I'm not an advocate of physical violence here. All I'm saying is that some people do resort to it.
Sure.
And I think 9 times out of 10, and maybe even better than that, 99.9% of the time, physical beating does not kill you. But
No, I don't think it does either, but banging someone's head repeatedly against the concrete does.
Right.
And
But again, if you put yourself in that position, before we have these laws and before we have this verbiage, I think that makes you think twice. This is what I'm coming back to empowerment.
Mhm.
I think had George Zimmerman not been armed that night and known everything that we say now, knowing that he got close enough, knowing how tall the boy was, knowing how strong he was, already feeling he's suspicious.
Sure.
I think if he's not armed, he doesn't even approach him, because you would know you'd have no mean to do anything.
And maybe that's the case, but
We don't know.
we can't
But
comment
that-
on that.
But
'Cause
we
we don't
can't,
know.
exactly. But
There's
think,
a lot of hypotheticals here.
but that's society, and
Maybe it is.
is this where we're going? And I think that's the bigger case, because obviously we're not going to bring the boy back.
No, absolutely.
And
not.
we're not going to put this guy in jail now.
No.
But people are still talking, I think, because we're saying, is this society? This is why they're having these forums, I think, and this is why they're having these town halls,
Right.
because they're saying, is this the way we're going? Is this a byproduct of what we've created?
But yeah, I think it is. I think it is a byproduct of that. I really do. I think that having a firearm in your possession does empower you, but I think it does it in 2 different ways. I think you can take it the wrong way. I think you can use that as an excuse to maybe pick a fight because you know that you have the final ace in the hole. And when I teach classes, we absolutely positively teach that is not what it is for. This isn't, a 007 license to go out and do whatever you want to do. This is a license that you have to carry a weapon concealed in order to protect yourself and your family.
That being said, I think now we know why you feel George Zimmerman was okay to be acquitted, which is what brought you to that corner that day.
Yes.
Now, my question would be, now, we did have some talk that day. Were you signing people up for
concealed carry
Yes.
class? Yes.
So that
we
was
did.
true. Okay.
Yes, we did do that. I also brought a sign-up sheet for the basic firearms class that we offer, and we actually got one person signed up for that. We got 2 people signed up for concealed carry class.
Now, why was this the time to do that?
I think it's the other side of the argument.
Why? But I think their argument was that he should have been found guilty because he profiled the person. I didn't hear. I mean, when we sat here with them, I don't think at any point they said that being allowed to conceal carry was bad.
No, I don't think that the 3 individuals that you had in here have said that, but I think that people all over the country have made the issue that if George Zimmerman would not legally have been able to carry a gun, that this situation would have been different. And I completely agree. I think if George Zimmerman would not have had a gun that day, we still would have had a death, but it would have been the other direction.
Do you really think he would have killed him?
Absolutely.
Really?
I think
Now,
he would
what
have.
are the statistics, though? Because I'm sure something like this has happened some other place.
I'm sure it has.
And I think somebody would have brought it up by now that the the neighborhood watch person was killed. I don't think that happens a whole lot.
Well, I don't know. I haven't seen any studies done on that.
Well, if somebody's watching, post them.
Absolutely.
Because it would be interesting to know that. But again, back to Marion, back where we are. Why did you decide to do it exactly when they were doing it? And why on the same corner, on the same area?
Well, again, we chose the opposite corner so that it wasn't, there wasn't a chance for, let's yell and scream and somebody does something dumb and starts pushing each other around or something of that nature. We certainly didn't want that to happen. But if you have a group of people who are going to come out and say, hey, we're going to come up, we're going to raise a stink, and we're going to have signs, and we're going to yell and holler and carry on, and we're going to protest, and we're going to say, that the acquittal of George Zimmerman was wrong, then we're going to present the other side at the same time.
Now, the people driving down the street, what did you feel? Were they honking? What were they doing?
There were some people that honked. And the kids that were here that, in your initial interview, they were probably right. There were probably 30 or 40 honks at that point. One of the women that was on the other side of the street kept setting off her car alarm so that it would would honk constantly while they were having people come down the street. I thought that was interesting. But
well, when you got there and you realized it was kids,
there were 3 individuals that were kids. The other 5 were adults.
Okay. When you realized there were kids over there, what did you think?
I thought it was great, actually. I disagree with what they said, but I think that it was fantastic that we have 3 young people in this community that want to come out and actually stand for something.
Do you understand why they disagree with you?
Yeah, I completely understand why they disagree with me.
Okay. And I think that's important, because I think you, and as well they should, understand why there is a disagreement there. Was there ever any conversation between the 2 groups? Because it's my understanding that there was.
No, I don't believe that there was.
There never was.
Really, no, I don't think so. When we left, we wished them a good day, and they said something, along the lines of, you guys too, or something along those lines. But really, there wasn't any conversation between the 2.
Do you believe the majority of people feel their way or feel your way by standing there?
By standing there, well, it's hard to tell when you're only dealing with people that are driving past. So, it's kind of hard to tell because you got 30, 40 people that blow a horn. Were they blowing a horn because they were in support of, what the people on the other side of the street were doing because they had a sign that said honk for Trayvon? Were they blowing a horn because they were upset that there were people hanging out in the middle of Center Street waving signs at them? How many people drove by that didn't honk because they supported, or that they did honk because they didn't support? It's kind of hard, obviously, to tell just based on the amount of people that would blow their horn as they're driving down Center Street on a Friday evening. But in the dealings that I've had with people, in the talkings that I've done around town, I would say it's probably 25-75, that 75% of the people are supporting the acquittal.
Now, one of the other things I heard is they described it, your group, how many were in your group again?
There were initially 6, and then we had one more woman that had heard about it that showed up later.
Okay, 7. So you guys came with your weapons on your side.
We did.
Why?
Well, there's 2 reasons. One, again, we're making this, this is an issue in our opinion about legally being able to carry a firearm. Every person that was there that had their firearm on them that day has a concealed weapons permit. In the state of Ohio, there's two ways you can legally carry a gun. One, you go through the class, you go through the background check, you go through your sheriff's office, you get a license to carry a gun concealed. At that point, you can carry that firearm concealed anywhere that doesn't have the sign up that says you're not allowed to. The other way is you can legally open carry anywhere in the state of Ohio. You don't have to have a license to do that. Now, you can't be a convicted felon. You can't be, prohibited from carrying a firearm because you've been deemed, mentally incapable of doing so by a court. But for the most part, anybody can carry a firearm, what they call open carry. You just carry it on your hip. It's not concealed. Anybody can see it. We chose to carry open for one reason and one reason only. We really felt that had there been any sort of an issue, either side of the aisle or either side of the street there protesting, we wanted to make sure that the people knew that we were armed. And that wasn't certainly a threatening thing to do, but had we shown up concealed and there had been giant yelling matches or, something, people yelling back and forth, or, heaven forbid somebody had thrown something back and forth, we wanted to make sure that we were in the right, because the police would have obviously shown up. They were there. Either way, there was a police car that sat there with two officers in it through the entire thing, but we didn't want it to make it look like we were trying to hide anything. We were coming out there in support of our right to carry a firearm, because there are a lot of people out there who are saying now we shouldn't have the right to carry a firearm, and then using this case as their justification to do so. We're supporting our right to carry a firearm, and we wanted it out in the open that that's what we were doing. We didn't want to hide anything.
Now, there are two things here I think that are interesting. Number one, maybe herein lies the problem, in general, that you didn't know who was going to show up on the other side. There might have been some trouble, as you say, from the other group. Could have been yelling, could have been screaming.
Could have started from our side because we didn't know who was coming necessarily in support of our group either.
Exactly. So when you come there and you have the weapon on your side, is that to... I'm confused. Is that to frighten somebody? What is that to do?
Absolutely not. Again, we were there demonstrating our support for our right to carry that gun. And again, we didn't want to conceal them because we didn't want it to be an issue of threat. We wanted it to be out in the open. If you can see the fact that I have a gun, you know that I have a gun. That's the end of it. You know that I do. If I have a suspicious bulge on the side of my hip that's covered by a jacket or covered by a shirt, you don't know what's going on at that point. And we didn't want to put the police in that situation.
But either way, what would have been the problem, I guess?
With what?
With whether it was the bulge or whether it was the weapon on your side, why would this have been a problem for the police or the group over here?
Well, the deal that what I'm saying here is that had there been any sort of problem, we all know how protests can go. We don't know who's coming, okay? This was put out on Marion News, so we really don't know who's coming. And with our side of the street saying we have we support the right to carry a gun, we wanted to do that while we were doing it to show our support for that issue. Had someone shown up that we don't know who they were and started trouble, when the police had to come into the situation, we wanted them to know what was going on, okay? Anytime that the police have to come and deal with someone who has a weapon on them, it makes them very nervous, obviously, because they're not the only armed person in the situation. So had something happened, we would have been able to say, okay, you have absolutely no problems here. You can see the fact that I have my gun on me, and we're good. If that had been covered up, if we had been out there saying, hey, we have the right to carry a gun, but everybody had been concealed, and the police had come up and tried to talk to us, they wouldn't have known who was and who wasn't carrying at that point. We just wanted to level that out and have everybody be up front and say this is what we're doing.
Right, but I guess you say if somebody shows up who is, you don't know who's going to show up.
Sure.
Who want to start trouble.
Okay.
So this is just a measure so the police who would have shown up would have known that you would have had the weapon?
No, they would have known who wasn't going to be a problem for them.
Who what? Now
there were only two of us that had weapons on us.
Well, I guess why is that signification of not a problem?
Again, if you have a protest that goes bad and you've got people yelling and screaming and throwing a fit at each other, things of that nature, and again, the police come in the middle of it, they want to know what the situation is. And so we wanted to make sure that they knew who was armed on our side and say, you don't have to worry about us. Yes, we have our guns on us. We're not trying to hide this from you. We're not trying to make this, more difficult for you to do your job. We're here in support of our right to carry a gun, and there's two ways to do that. You can do it concealed or you can do it open. And again, had there been any sort of an issue, we wanted to make sure that there wasn't an issue with the firearm.
Here's where I think just with this particular thing in Marion, not even so much with what the Trayvon Martin case was, even though that's what kind of brought this all together.
Sure.
Here's the gobbledygook that I'm in, that after listening to both sides of this. They're down there protesting that Trayvon Martin George Zimmerman should have been found guilty because he should not have killed Trayvon Martin, and he did profile him because of his race. Your side says Zimmerman should have been acquitted because his life was in danger, and we want to keep our right to bear arms because there are people who want to take this away. But I don't think the group on the other side of the street was advocating to take the weapon away. So I'm confused.
Those individuals that were on the other side of the street may not have been saying that. But again, we didn't know who was coming. There are people on the other side of this argument that the people that were on the other side of the street that day that were in question, that we're talking about now, they were making this a race issue. But there is a whole other group of people that are making this a gun issue.
But
and
not those people.
Not those specific individuals, but we didn't know who was coming. All they said was that there was going to be this rally in support of Trayvon Martin. So we didn't know who was coming.
So when you hear a rally in support of Trayvon Martin, you hear anti-gun?
Absolutely.
Why? Because I really think in the latter days of this, I really have not heard any gun talk.
There's been a lot of gun talk. There's been gun talk on the floor of the House of Representatives and in the Senate.
Yes, there has in general gun talk, but in this particular case, ever since it came back in the public eye when the trial started, I have not heard gun talk. I haven't heard any.
Absolutely. Eric Holder came out, who's the Attorney General of the United States, came out the day after the acquittal and made it a gun issue.
But in what way?
He came out and immediately said that we need to re-evaluate stand your ground and concealed carry laws across the United States.
Stand your ground, I think.
He said both.
Okay, but
absolutely.
But do you feel? I mean, when I'm watching this stuff, when I'm watching it, and I don't watch every bit of it, but when I'm watching it, it certainly to me turned into more about race. It seemed like every talk show that I saw, race was the issue,
sure, and
every public forum was about race.
Yes.
Now, gun might have come up in that,
yeah,
but it certainly was not based in that, much like the Sandy Hook and the other
right.
shooting were.
Because
so I felt that this was not.
I think that actually happens because you don't spark people's emotions when you talk about gun control. You spark people's emotions when you start talking about race. And you get better ratings on your TV show if you can get people arguing over the color of someone's skin rather than whether or not the Second Amendment applies.
Well, I think they do pretty well with gun control.
Sometimes they do.
I think they do pretty well with that issue.
I think that race is a much more hot-button issue than guns are.
I don't know. I guess to me, when I hear about it now, I just don't think of it as a gun issue at this point. I understand when it first came about, it seemed to be a little more guised than that.
Sure.
But since it came about in the last month, I think people have actually gotten into the discussion again of, do we profile in this country? Do we group people? Do we see people different? How far have we come? What's this whole thing been about? I haven't heard hardly any talk about wanting to get stricter gun legislation, because I also think that's a misnomer, and the whole gun thing is another issue. Conversation but when you do talk about this stuff,
absolutely,
because I think there are a lot of ways to go with this, and I think if nothing else, it certainly brought, for what it's worth, race, gun issue, and even what you should do in your own community to people's forefront.
Okay.
You think?
No argument there.
Yeah.
I think you're right. We're still going to end up being on opposite sides of the...
Well, I don't know if you and I are on opposite sides.
I think you and I are further apart than what...
No. I think.
No. I think you're the three kids that were in here a couple of weeks ago. I think you're closer to their side of the argument than mine.
I wouldn't say that.
I think so.
I wouldn't say that. But we'll get out here on that note. See you later.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Scott Spears Now. We try very, very hard and very, very diligently to offer both sides of the story on this program. So always, always, always know that every coin has two sides, as does every story. But until next time, this coin is flipped. So it's my turn to say, this is Scott Spears, heading for the dugout.